The bet started as a joke at my daughter's wedding reception. I was dancing with my granddaughter when Brad Morrison, the John Deere dealer who'd been trying to sell me equipment for 15 years, came over with that condescending smile he always wore. He said, "Sarah, when are you going to retire that museum piece and buy real equipment? You're embarrassing yourself running a commercial operation with a tractor older than you are." My 1956 Farmall 450 is 68 years old. I'm 63. Math isn't Brad's strong suit apparently, but I let it slide because it was my daughter's wedding and I was trying to be gracious. I said, "Brad, that tractor works perfectly. Why would I replace something that doesn't need replacing?" "Because," he said louder now, getting attention from nearby tables, "modern equipment is superior in every measurable way. Efficiency, power, capability. Your old Farmall can't compete with current technology. You're just stubborn." People were listening now. My son-in-law's family, half the county. Brad had made this public, made it about my competence as a farmer, made it personal. So I said, "Bet you're wrong. I'll bet my Farmall 450 can outperform any John Deere you've got on any task you want to name. You pick the challenge. You pick the tractor. We'll settle this." The reception went quiet. Brad's face showed surprise, then calculation, then that smirk. He said, "You're serious. You'll put money on that. $10,000, serious. My Farmall against your best tractor. County fair, demonstration, public. Let everyone see." Brad stuck out his hand. "Deal. I'll bring my flagship 9620, our newest technology. We'll do a pulling contest. Your antique versus my modern masterpiece. This will be educational." We shook hands. My daughter looked horrified. My granddaughter looked excited. "I just bet $10,000 I didn't have on a tractor I'd been told for decades was obsolete." "My name is Sarah Chun. I'm a second-generation farmer running 800 acres outside Lincoln, Nebraska. My father bought that Farmall 450 new in 1956. Paid $4,000 for it. That tractor helped build this operation. Helped raise 2 kids. Helped prove a Chinese immigrant family could farm successfully in rural Nebraska when plenty of people didn't think we belonged here. That tractor means something to me that Brad Morrison could never understand. It's not about nostalgia. It's about capability proven over decades. About reliability demonstrated through actual work. About the fact that my father trusted his family's survival to that machine, and it never once let him down. But I'll be honest, I had no idea if it could actually beat a modern John Deere in a polling contest. I'd made the bet on pride and anger. Now I had to figure out if I could actually win it. I spent the next week studying, not the Farmall. I knew that tractor intimately. Knew every system, every capability, every limitation. I'd been running it for 41 years, since I was 22 years old. Since my father first let me solo on it. Since he taught me that understanding your equipment meant understanding how to make it do things other people thought impossible. My father, Chun Wei, had immigrated from Taiwan in 1954. 23 years old, barely spoke English, had $40 and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. He washed dishes, saved money. Bought 80 acres nobody else wanted because the soil was tired and the drainage was poor. Spent 5 years improving that land, proving he could farm despite everyone saying Chinese immigrants didn't belong in Nebraska agriculture. In 1956, he had enough saved to buy real equipment. The Farmall 450, brand new from the dealer, $4,000. Most expensive thing he'd ever purchased. He told me years later that he cried the first time he drove it. Cried because he'd achieved something. Owned something substantial. Proved he belonged. That tractor represented everything he'd built. Everything he'd overcome. When he taught me to run it in 1983, he made me understand it wasn't just machinery. It was legacy. It was proof that we belonged here. That we'd earned our place. That we didn't need to prove anything to anyone except ourselves. So when Brad Morrison laughed at my equipment, he wasn't just questioning machinery. He was questioning everything my father built. Everything our family proved. Everything I'd maintained for 4 decades. That's why this mattered. What I studied that week was the competition, the John Deere 9620 R that Brad was bringing. I downloaded the technical manual, studied specifications, read engineering reviews, watched demonstration videos. That tractor was impressive. 320 horsepower, infinitely variable transmission, intelligent power management, active traction control. Technology designed to optimize every aspect of performance. On paper, it was vastly superior to my Farmall. Would win easily if this was just about raw specifications matching marketing claims. But I'd learned something, farming for 41 years under my father's philosophy. Specifications are theoretical. Real-world performance is practical. And practical performance depends on understanding conditions, understanding physics, understanding what actually matters versus what sounds impressive in a sales brochure. I called my old college roommate Rebecca Martinez, who'd become a mechanical engineer at Caterpillar. We'd gone to University of Nebraska together in the late 70s. She'd watched me deal with being one of the few women in AG engineering classes. Watched me prove I belonged, despite professors who suggested I'd be happier in home economics. Now she designed heavy equipment and understood physics better than anyone I knew. I explained the situation. The bet, the stakes, the David versus Goliath dynamic. She laughed at first, then got serious when she realized I was committed to this. Sarah, she said, pulling isn't about horsepower. That's what marketing departments want you to believe, because horsepower is easy to measure and compare. But actual pulling force is about weight distribution, traction coefficient, torque curve, leverage, and coefficient of friction. You might actually have advantages you don't realize. Your Farmall was designed in an era when engineers optimized for those factors because they didn't have electronics to compensate for poor design. She spent 2 hours on the phone explaining the mechanics of tractor pulling, how weight placement matters more than total weight. A lighter tractor with optimal weight distribution can outpull a heavier tractor with poor distribution. How tire contact patch determines traction. Wider isn't always better if weight isn't properly distributed. How power delivery curve affects pulling force. Smooth torque beats peak horsepower. How the fundamental rules of physics don't care about marketing claims or dealer profit margins. She ran calculations based on the specifications I gave her. The Farmall's weight distribution, the rear tire dimensions, the ballast configuration, the engine torque curve, compared against the 9620 R's published data. Finally, she said, Sarah, if the soil conditions are right and you prepare properly, you've got maybe a 30% chance of winning. Not great odds, but better than zero. Physics gives you a chance. Execution determines outcome. By the end of that conversation, I wasn't certain I'd win. but I was certain I had a chance if I prepared correctly. The county fair was 3 weeks away. I spent that time preparing the Farmall like I was going to war, like my father had taught me to maintain equipment, with precision, with respect, with understanding that proper preparation makes the difference between success and failure. First, I went through every system methodically, changed engine oil and filter, fresh hydraulic fluid, transmission fluid checked and topped, greased every fitting, checked brake adjustment, inspected every belt, verified governor's settings. This wasn't just maintenance, this was optimization. Then I focused on traction. The rear tires were original equipment. Firestone ground grips from 1956. They'd been filled with calcium chloride solution decades ago for ballast. But I checked the mixture, verified the concentration, added more solution to maximize weight right at the traction point. Each rear tire now weighed over 800 pounds just from the liquid ballast. That's 1,600 pounds positioned exactly where it mattered most. Tire pressure was critical. Rebecca had explained that too much pressure reduces contact patch. Too little causes tire deformation that wastes energy. I set it at exactly 18 psi, optimal for pulling in Nebraska soil conditions. Verified it with a precision gauge. Not close enough. Exactly 18 psi. Weight distribution was next. The Farmall had front weights that could be repositioned. I moved them forward to reduce weight on the front axle, transferred more weight to the rear, improved the leverage ratio, added additional suitcase weights to the rear axle mounting points. Every pound positioned for maximum pulling advantage. My daughter Emma came by the farm one evening while I was working. It was late, almost dark. She'd stopped after her shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. She watched me adjust weights, measure, calculate, adjust again. Finally she said, "Mom, why does this matter so much? It's just a bet. $10,000 you can afford to lose if you have to. Why are you doing this?" I stopped what I was doing, set down the wrench I was holding, looked at my daughter in the fading light. She deserved a real answer. I said, "When I started farming in 1983, people said a woman couldn't run a commercial farm successfully. When I took over completely from your grandfather in 1991 after he had his stroke, people said I'd fail without him. Men at the coop would talk past me. Direct questions to male employees I didn't even have. Assume I didn't know what I was doing. When I kept using old equipment instead of financing new machinery every 5 years, people said I was foolish. Penny-wise and pound foolish, they said. Behind the times. Stubborn. Too emotional to make smart business decisions." Emma knew some of this, but not all of it. Not the depth of it. I continued, every time someone questioned my competence, I proved them wrong by succeeding. By running a profitable operation. By producing yields that matched or exceeded farmers with newer equipment. By showing that understanding farming matters more than having the newest technology. Brad Morrison questioning my Farmall isn't just about machinery. He's questioning my judgment, my competence as a farmer, my intelligence. Everything I've built over 41 years, everything your grandfather built before me. So yes, it matters. It matters because I'm tired of having to prove I belong here. Tired of having my decisions questioned because I'm a woman, or because I'm Chinese, or because I don't farm the way everyone else farms. Emma nodded slowly. She understood. Then she said something I didn't expect. something that reframed everything. She said, "Mom, I'm glad you made this bet. Olivia needs to see this. Needs to see her grandmother doesn't back down when challenged by men who assume they know better. Needs to see women can be right even when men with credentials and money and social status are certain they're wrong. Needs to see that defending your judgment matters, that proving yourself matters, that fighting battles like this matters even when the stakes seem small." Olivia, my granddaughter, 9 years old. I'd been thinking about the bet as pride, as proving a point to Brad Morrison, as defending my father's legacy, but Emma was right. This was also about demonstration, about what we show the next generation, about what 9-year-old girls learn from watching their grandmothers navigate a world that still questions women's competence. That night I called Olivia, told her about the upcoming competition. She said, "Grandma, are you going to win?" I said, "I don't know, honey, but I'm going to try my best. And whatever happens, I'm going to show everyone that your Grandma Sarah doesn't quit just because someone thinks she can't succeed." Olivia, my granddaughter, 9 years old. I'd been thinking about the bet as pride, but Emma was right. This was about more than winning. It was about what we demonstrate to the next generation. Fair day arrived. The county fairgrounds were packed. Word had spread. The Chinese farmer with the old Farmall challenging the John Deere dealer to a polling contest. Underdog story. Community entertainment. Possibly public humiliation for one of us. Brad showed up in a semi-truck hauling his 9620R. That tractor was magnificent. Gleaming paint. Massive tires. Technology displays. The crowd gathered around it. People were taking pictures. This machine looked unbeatable. I showed up in my farm truck pulling the Farmall 450 on a small trailer. That tractor looked tiny next to Brad's machine. Looked old. Looked outclassed. Several people laughed. A few shook their heads. The betting odds, if there had been betting, would have been heavily against me. The fair committee had organized this professionally. Hired a proper pulling sled. Set rules. Both tractors would hook to the same sled. Pull as far as possible. Weight transfers forward as you pull, making it progressively harder. Furthest distance wins. Simple, fair, public. Brad went first. That massive John Deere hooked to the sled. The crowd went quiet. Brad revved the engine. The turbo spooled with that distinctive whistle. 320 horsepower ready to demonstrate superiority. He dropped the clutch. The rear tires bit into the dirt. The sled moved. That big tractor pulled like it was nothing at first. 50 feet, 100 feet, the engine was working now. The tires were digging, but it kept pulling. 150 feet, 200 feet. The weight was massive. The tractor was straining, but modern engineering was doing its job. At 247 feet, the tires finally broke loose and started spinning. Brad stopped immediately. Professional, clean pull. The crowd applauded. That was impressive. Undeniably impressive. 247 feet with thousands of pounds on that sled. Brad climbed down, grinning. Looked at me. Looked at my Farmall. The expression on his face said, "This is over." Said there's no way that old tractor competes with what you just saw. Said he'd won before I even tried. Then it was my turn. I backed the Farmall up to the sled. The visual contrast was almost comical. Brad's tractor was massive. Modern. Aggressive. Mine looked like a toy. Looked like something from a museum. The crowd was watching with a mixture of curiosity and pity. This poor woman was about to be humiliated. About to learn an expensive lesson about modern technology. But I knew something Brad didn't know. Something the crowd didn't know. Something that 2 hours on the phone with an engineer and 41 years of practical experience had taught me. The Farmall 450 was designed in an era when engineers optimized for torque and traction rather than peak horsepower. Every pound of that tractor's weight was positioned over the rear axle. The wheelbase was shorter. The center of gravity was lower. The rear tires were massive for the tractor's size and filled with calcium chloride solution, adding hundreds of pounds right at the traction point. The diesel engine made peak torque at low RPM, around 1400 revolutions per minute. Right where you need it for heavy pulling. No turbo lag. No complex electronics. Just raw mechanical advantage delivered through a simple drivetrain with minimal power loss. I climbed onto the seat, started the engine. That distinctive diesel sound. Different from Brad's modern turbo diesel. Simpler, more direct. The sound of engineering from an era when reliability mattered more than sophistication. I positioned at the starting line. Revved to 1400 RPM. That sweet spot where torque peaked. The whole tractor vibrated with contained force. I dropped the clutch. The Farmall dug in. The rear tires bit deep into the dirt. The sled jerked forward. We were moving. Not explosive. Not dramatic. Just steady, relentless, forward progress. 50 feet. The crowd started paying attention. 100 feet. People started standing up. This wasn't supposed to happen. 150 feet. The noise level increased. The old tractor was competing. I kept it steady. Kept the engine at 1400 RPM. Let the physics work. Weight distribution. Traction coefficient. Mechanical advantage. All the factors Rebecca had explained. All the advantages the Farmall had that didn't show up in specifications. 200 feet. The crowd was getting loud now. 247 feet. I'd matched Brad's distance. People were on their feet. This was impossible. The 68-year-old tractor had pulled as far as the modern machine, but I wasn't stopping. The Farmall was still pulling. Engines screaming now. Working at capacity. Tires throwing dirt. But moving forward. Physics was on my side. Engineering was on my side. 68 years of proven capability was on my side. 260 feet. 270. Every foot was harder. Every inch was earned. The weight was crushing. But that old Farmall refused to quit. 278 feet. The tires finally broke traction completely. I stopped. Shut down. The crowd exploded. The noise was deafening. People were cheering, jumping, celebrating. The old Farmall had beaten the modern John Deere by 31 feet. Against all odds. Against all expectations. I climbed down and looked at Brad. His face showed shock. Disbelief. He couldn't process what had just happened. His flagship tractor, with all its technology and horsepower, had been beaten by a machine built when Eisenhower was president. He walked over slowly. The crowd went quiet, waiting to see his reaction. Finally, he said, "How? That's not possible. Your tractor has a fraction of my horsepower. How did you beat me?" I could have been gracious, could have accepted victory quietly. But Brad had made this public, had questioned my competence, had laughed at my equipment and my judgment. So I gave him the truth straight. I said, "Brad, you've been trying to sell me tractors for 15 years. Every time you come to my farm, you talk about horsepower and technology and how old equipment can't compete. But you've never actually asked what I need. Never listened when I explained why my equipment works. You assumed old meant inferior without understanding why old might sometimes mean better." The crowd was listening. This wasn't just about the pull anymore, I continued. My Farmall won because it was designed by engineers who understood physics. Weight distribution matters more than peak horsepower. Traction coefficient matters more than engine size. Mechanical simplicity means nothing to brake at critical moments. Your tractor is impressive, but impressive and optimal aren't the same thing. Brad stood there absorbing that. The crowd waited. Finally he said, "You're right. I assumed. I apologize. You beat me fair and square with better preparation and better understanding of the task." Then he did something that surprised me. He said, "I owe you $10,000. But I'd like to propose something different. Instead of paying you cash, let me sponsor an agricultural education program at the county 4-H, teach kids about equipment, about physics, about how farming actually works instead of how marketing says it works. Your Farmall can be the centerpiece. Show them that understanding matters more than assumptions." I thought about that, thought about Olivia watching, thought about what we were demonstrating, thought about what mattered more than money. I said, "Deal, but I'm teaching the first class. And the first lesson is that old doesn't mean worthless. It means proven." Brad smiled. Real smile this time, not the salesman's smile. He stuck out his hand. We shook. The crowd applauded. But here's what happened next that nobody expected. That nobody planned for. 3 days after the fair, Brad showed up at my farm. He had something to tell me. Something that had been bothering him since the pull. Something he needed to confess. He said, "Sarah, I need to be honest with you. That 9,620 RI brought to the fair wasn't running at full capacity. I'd adjusted the fuel delivery to limit power output because I was worried about tearing up the fairgrounds. I was running at maybe 70%. If I'd run it wide open, I probably would have pulled further." I looked at him, waited to see where this was going. He continued, "So technically, I could argue you didn't beat my tractor at full capability. Could argue the contest wasn't fair. Could ask for a rematch. But I'm not going to do that. You know why?" "Why?" I asked. "Because even if I'd beaten you on the pull, you were right about everything else. I've been selling equipment for 30 years without really understanding what farmers need. I've been focused on specifications instead of application. You've been farming successfully with equipment I dismissed as obsolete. That proves my assumptions were wrong regardless of who pulled further. I respected that, respected the honesty, the willingness to admit fault beyond just losing a contest." Then he said something that changed our relationship entirely. He said, "I want to learn from you. Want to understand why old equipment works in ways I've been missing. Would you be willing to teach me? Show me your operation? Help me become a better dealer by actually understanding farming instead of just selling features?" I agreed. Over the next year, Brad spent 1 day a week at my farm, learning, observing, asking questions, understanding why I made the choices I made, why I maintained old equipment, why I trusted proven systems over new technology. He became a better dealer, started listening to farmers, started recommending equipment based on need rather than commission. started respecting old equipment as valid tools rather than dismissing them. The 4-H program happened too. We teach kids about agriculture, about equipment, about physics, about thinking critically instead of accepting assumptions. My Farmall is the centerpiece. Hands-on education with a machine that's proven its worth across nearly 7 decades. Olivia comes to every class. She's 14 now. Wants to be an agricultural engineer? Wants to design equipment that combines modern technology with the proven principles of older machines. She says her grandmother's tractor taught her that good engineering is timeless, that principles matter more than trends, that Farmall 450 still works my farm, still pulls, still plants, still harvests, still proves daily that old doesn't mean obsolete. That capability proven across decades is worth more than specifications printed in a brochure. Brad still tries to sell me equipment, but now he asks questions first, listens to answers, respects when I say my current equipment works fine. We've become friends, built on mutual respect, earned through competition and honesty. I made a bet I wasn't certain I could win, risked money I couldn't afford to lose, put my pride and reputation on the line in public, all to prove that my judgment was sound, that my father's choice of equipment in 1956 was still valid in 2024. That old could still compete with new when old was built, right? The Farmall won that pull, but the real victory was what happened after. The education program, the changed relationship with Brad, the lesson Olivia learned about not accepting assumptions, the proof that questioning status quo is sometimes right even when everyone thinks you're wrong. My name is Sarah Chun. I'm 63 years old. I farm with equipment people call obsolete. And I just proved that sometimes the old ways work because they're built on principles that don't age, that physics doesn't care about marketing, that proven reliability beats theoretical superiority. I bet my old Farmall could beat any John Deere. The dealer laughed, then got shocked, not just by losing, but by learning that everything he thought he knew about farming equipment was incomplete. That's the best kind of shock. The kind that leads to growth. The kind that changes minds. The kind that proves learning never stops regardless of age or experience or how certain you are that you're right. Sometimes the most valuable lesson is delivered by a 68-year-old tractor that refuses to quit, that outperforms modern equipment. That proves old doesn't mean worthless. It just means proven, tested, reliable, built to last. And those qualities never go out of style.